welcome here in our studios from Sarakunda. This is the Star TV News and I'm Ajakari Sanyu. In the headlines tonight, thousands of informal sector workers jobless as Gambia closes non-essential businesses. Star FM TV donates sanitary materials to Numuyai village. Commuters decry increment of public transport fares by drivers. New constitution to provide safe haven for all citizens, President Barrow. On the international scene, social distancing, hand washing difficult amid poverty in Senegal. WHO calls on Asia-Pacific countries to stay vigilant in pandemic fight. Analysts expect oil prices to drop further. Those were the headlines and now the news in detail. With the announcement of the closure of non-essential businesses taken by the executive to limit the spread of the coronavirus in the Gambia, thousands of people who work in the informal sector are sent to technical unemployment, a pill that is difficult to swallow for some of them regarding their day-to-day survival. For these workers, without accompanying measures, if it is not the coronavirus, it is hunger that will strike. Amadou Bare was out and he now reports.
They consider themselves as the real victims of the coronavirus pandemic in the Gambia, sitting in groups in front of their tightly closed stalls under the police control. Here, almost no one is working. Worry and distress can be read on their faces. Some have started to resell their personal items, like this youth who sells his personal computer to the highest bidder. Babakar Jambanka, a Senegalese second-hand clothes seller, did not want to defy the ban, but it was despite him that he came to exhibit his merchandise to feed his family. Without any accompanying measures, how can we decide overnight to close all so-called non-essential business? It is senseless and untenable. I'm running out of money today. I wanted to stay confined like everyone else, but how to confine a hungry person? My wife had to work hard to prepare simple rice without sauce. This is how I decided to come and defy the ban and try to sell some pants. He says he was surprised by the turn of events. He invested everything in his business. He brandished with a yellow smile all that remains to him as economy, $50. Malik Toure, a vendor to this market too, saw his shop close. If it is not the coronavirus, hunger is likely to do more damage. They say these are restrictions to limit the spread of coronavirus, but it is counterproductive. People risk starvation. I can assure you that some of my neighbors don't have enough to eat today. They live from day to day, and this is far from being an isolated case. For the Senegalese who work in this market, things fall apart, as with the current border closure, they can no longer return to their home country. They are calling on the Gambian government to be flexible, taking into account the realities on the ground. Reporting for Star TV News, I am Amadou Bare.
The management and board of Star TV donated sanitary materials to the village of Numuyal in Basse. This donation is part of efforts in fighting against the global pandemic, as Numuyal village in Upper River region is among the places affected with this pandemic virus. However, Star TV deems it fitting to extend its gesture to the people of this region and beyond. Model Baji reports.
The COVID-19 outbreak has sent a strong wind of fear in the minds of many. More so, the people of Upper River region, where the third case of this pandemic registered in Numuel village after a France-based Gambian returned to his home village. The general manager of Star FM Star TV, Sarah Camara, applauded those who donated during the pledge campaign, indicating that the globe is on its trying times when it comes to its economic aspect.
We all know that we are at hard times right now. Looking at the economy of the country is down, and then looking at the state of emergency also, everybody right now is thinking about your household, how to take care of your family, and then the daily consumption, your food stuff, everything, because we know that most of them right now are working, and then they're out of business. So if some of them did not give us their pledges, we understand the situation in this country right now. But what we have to say is just a thank you to them because they made efforts. They call in the radio program, and then they also making pledges. So we want to say a big thank you to them. We are not disappointed because they don't, honor their pledges, because there are reasons why they are not able to follow those pledges. But we are very grateful, despite the fact that they did not, because they did call in, to show that okay, they really want to support us, that they have the radio station at hand. Also, we want to say a big thank you to all of them, and also a big thank you to those who were able to send us, their pledges, and a big thank you to Frontstar, because Frontstar, as I said, they gave us $50,000, which was very good.
DG Kamara highlighted that there are more sanitary materials to be donated to the people in the provinces, especially those in remote villages. Kamara concluded his remarks by urging the general public to embrace the hand washing and all the WHO measures. Elders of Numuyel village shared words of appreciation to the top executives of Star TV. They also urged them to continue the good momentum in the fight against the COVID-19. The director of Wolof News, Paul Stephen Purella, said this is an undertaking towards the fight against the COVID-19.
Hand washing material, containers and sanitizers and other detergent. It's all towards the fight to end the coronavirus that is currently hindering a lot or hampering a lot of activities around the world and the Ghana. The government alone cannot do it, but as the mouthpiece of the general public, so Star FM, Star TV department decided to call Gambians on a program to come out and donate, so that at least we can use an amount of money that we gather, so that we can give it out or buy these materials that we need and give it out to communities that cannot afford such. So that's the only thing that prompted us to do that, because we want to join the country as well, the Ministry of Health and the government, to make sure that we do this and get this virus away so that normal activities can come back within the country.
Mr. Stephen lamented that the government alone cannot do it. That's why their medium deems it necessary to come up with this initiative. Reporting for Star TV, I am Modu Elbaji.
The commuters along the Banjul-Brikama Highway complained of increment of fare on public transport vehicles by drivers since the president ordered all public vehicles to carry half of the required number of passengers. Jacqueline Koli was out on the streets and she now reports.
The commuters complained bitterly about the transport increment carried out by the drivers. Alhaji Tamsir Ngom, a commuter who traveled from Costa Road to Banjul, said the drivers are being unfair to them in increasing the fares to $50 from Westfield to Banjul, which used to be $25 for a taxi, and vans charge $10, but now they either charge $30 or $35 per person. Amadou Sajo Jallo, a taxi driver, said it will be hard on them if they don't increase the fares, because now the taxis are only allowed to carry 2 passengers, which to him is a big loss, and Banjul is far to travel for only $50 of income. He said they should be allowed to carry at least 3 passengers, 2 at the back and 1 in the front seat, and everything will go back to normal. He added that if that cannot be done, then the cost of fuel needs to be reduced. Chioma Jasmine also complained of the levies of fares by drivers. She said she has not experienced such, but urged the government and drivers to do something about it, because if not, the masses will suffer most, because as of now, some are not working because of the virus outbreak. So they are not earning, nor can they provide 3 square meals in a day. Some were seen boarding the school buses to their destinations, complaining of how high other vehicles charge for transport. Some drivers did not agree to speak on record, but urged the government to do something about the situation by reducing the price of fuel, or both commuters and drivers will suffer the consequences. Jacqueline Koli, reporting for Star TV News.
President Adama Barrow has said that the new constitution, premised on strong foundations and all-inclusiveness, will provide a safe haven for all citizens to enjoy the path to peace, freedom and prosperity. The president made this remark in receiving the draft new constitution presented by the Constitutional Review Commission (CRC) at the State House this afternoon. Binta Koli files in this report.
The drafting process took the 11-member commission headed by Justice Cherno Jallow under 2 years to consult, draft, review and submit a validated new constitution to His Excellency President Adama Barrow. The exercise was meant to provide Gambians with a constitutional framework to enjoy their rights as citizens of this country. This springs up from the belief that every Gambian should comfortably relate to the constitution and that our institutions must be structured for sustained performance. President Barrow said at a ceremony attended by the Speaker of the National Assembly, Chief Justice of the Gambia, and a cross-section of cabinet ministers. He added that it would promote and nurture best practices as well as to maintain the country's values as a nation. Accommodating our diversity allows us to enjoy the fundamental of democracy, freedom and the rule of law.
The draft constitution has generated a lot of debate from different interest groups, which I have been following keenly. However, as a nation, we should be able to unite on the basic principles of human rights, institutional accountability, respect for the rule of law, and the dignity of the person. The new constitution should promote and nurture best practices and maintain our values as a nation.
Noting that the new constitution will allow government to focus on development and create the environment for all to enjoy their citizenship and realize their full potentials. The Attorney General and Minister of Justice Abubakar Tambedu described the submission of the new constitution by the CRC as a progress that is most profound and satisfying for him. He said a number of bills tabled before the National Assembly for enactment on top of this new constitution will radically transform the legal landscape of the country, particularly with respect to the country's criminal justice system. It marks another fulfilled promise to the people of this country. You promised a new constitution within 2 years and you have delivered on your promise. It is now up to us, the Gambian people, to uphold our path of the bargain, Abubakar Tambedu said. In June 2018, the 11-member Constitutional Review Commission was sworn into office and mandated to execute their assignment in 2 phases. First, to review the 1997 Constitution of the Republic of the Gambia and write a new constitution. Second, to prepare a report with regard to the new constitution. The CRC chairperson, Justice Cherno Jallow, reported that they have adhered to this statutory established function and exercised their discriminatory powers in a fair and balanced manner, bearing in mind that at all times that it considered to be the best interest and future of the Gambia. Constitution building is a serious business, said Chairman Jallow. But it is also a Herculean task, especially when the drafters of the new constitution are confronted with tons of wishes and aspiration for inclusion in that constitution, he added. Mr. Jallow said when President Barrow tasked them to review the 1997 Constitution, he was emphatic about the need to develop a constitution that will serve the test of time. Hence, they were grateful to be given both the strength and the commitment to achieve this for their country and as their leader expected of them. For Star TV News, I am Binta Koli.
And now news beyond our borders. In Senegal, the government has ordered curfews and lockdowns to stunt the spread of the coronavirus. But in a country with limited access to clean water, following health guidelines is difficult. Al Jazeera's Nicholas Haig reports from Dakar.
In the fight against the virus, Senegal is deploying bulldozers. This informal market was where people came for food, clothes, or a cup of tea, destroyed in a matter of minutes by a government which wants people to stop gathering in public spaces. Vendors retrieve what they can before the market is disinfected. The chemicals used are meant to protect them, they're told. Protect them from what, wonders street vendor Dion Nasser? More threatening than the virus is the uncertainty ahead, he says.
It's very dangerous. You know, people are out selling, you know, doing their activities because they cannot stay at home. Because when they stay at home, they cannot actually feed themselves.
In Nasser's neighborhood, where people live in close proximity, social distancing is a luxury. Confinement is not an option for those struggling to survive. while President Macky Sall shows people how to wash their hands in a country where most people don't have access to running water, the government is trying to impose a state of emergency and a curfew in order to limit movement of people. This is the case not just in Senegal, but in other African countries too. Several infected patients have escaped quarantine in isolation units in hospitals in Mauritania, Gambia and Zimbabwe. This crisis is revealing the level of trust people have in their government and health services. Before the outbreak, already people here were struggling with access to water and electricity. Now, with even more restrictive measures, they struggle with trying to make ends meet. 500 million people across sub-Saharan Africa live on less than $3 a day. Some already face war. Now they face a potential deadly virus. Save the Children says cases of COVID-19 have gone up by 500% in just a week.
We need to act now, and we need to maintain support for existing humanitarian response plans on which 100 million people depend. If such funding is diverted, the consequences could be catastrophic.
Cash-strapped African countries are calling for debt relief and $150 billion in emergency funding. With the number of cases multiplying daily, time isn't on their side. Nicholas Hawk, Al Jazeera, Dakar.
The World Health Organization is calling on Asia-Pacific countries to stay vigilant in the fight against the coronavirus pandemic. The warning comes amid further travel restrictions in Japan and other surge of infections in Singapore. Nearly 1,000 people in the city-state now have the virus. Al Jazeera's Florence Loy reports.
Wuhan, China, where the virus began, reported no new cases on Monday, its 7th day in a row. And nationwide, all the new cases reported were imported. But the World Health Organization warns, even for countries where the cases seem to be tapering off, this is not the time to let their guard down. Its regional director for Western Pacific, Takeshi Kasai, says countries will have to adopt multiple approaches: testing, isolating, and physical distancing to slow the spread of the virus.
Even with all of these measures, the risk will not go away as long as the pandemic continues. Rather, these measures can buy us valuable time to prepare for large-scale community transmission.
More countries are tightening restrictions. Japan has urged its citizens not to travel to 73 countries and regions, or a third of all countries in the world. Cases there have topped 2,000, with 2 clusters emerging in Tokyo over the past week. Last week, China banned foreigners from entering the country after seeing a rise in imported cases. In Hong Kong, residents who've returned from abroad are monitored to ensure they don't break quarantine rules.
The mobile app sends me notifications occasionally and asks me to take a photo of my arm with the wristband at my home, but I have no idea if anyone is really checking my response.
Malaysia, which imposed strict measures on movement and closed its borders to foreigners 2 weeks ago, will now require returning citizens to be quarantined at government centres instead of at home. New Zealand has extended a national state of emergency for another 7 days to provide the government powers and resources it needs to prevent the spread of coronavirus. Indonesia says it will ban all arrivals and transit by foreigners as the number of cases and deaths rise. No one knows how long the pandemic will last, but even after it's over, its impact will be felt for a long time. The World Bank's worst-case scenario estimates 11 million people in the region could be forced into poverty. Florence Louis, Al Jazeera.
Well, let's get the latest on developments across Asia. Katrina Yu is live in Beijing for us. Katrina, China, where you are, is obviously very keen to get its economy back on track, but it doesn't seem very likely, or for the rest of the region, really.
That's right. It's going to be a struggle, according to the World Bank, across the East Asia and Pacific region. It says that this pandemic has caused an unprecedented shock to these economies. And to demonstrate the scale of this impact, we've received some figures from them. So last year, China's GDP growth was 6.1%, according to official figures. But the World Bank says this year, because of the outbreak, that will be halved, more than halved, to 2.3%. And a worst-case scenario is that that growth could slow by as little as 0.1%. And for the rest of the region, it was 5.8% last year. And this year, it will be 2.1%, according to the World Bank, and potentially even slower to minus 0.5%. And equally, when it comes to poverty, as we heard in that package previously, millions could be plunged into poverty. Before the pandemic, 35 million people were expected to be lifted out of poverty. Because of it, 24 million at least will stay in poverty, and an additional 11 million could be plunged into poverty. And this is really bad news for China, because this was supposed to be a banner year for the Chinese government. 2020 was the year that they promised to eliminate poverty from the entire country. That's people living on less than $5.50 a day. And according to official figures, they had been making great strides. In 2012, there were 100 million people or so living in poverty in China, and last year that number was about 6 million. But now analysts say because of this outbreak, that target will be impossible to meet for China, because this outbreak has had a devastating impact on China's economy. We know in February, the country was brought to a standstill and manufacturing activity contracted for the first time in 30 years. But of course, there are other countries in this region which are even more vulnerable to the economic impact of this pandemic, and particularly countries which rely on tourism, for example, who rely on trade, countries which have an informal workforce, and also countries which are heavily indebted. So the World Bank says for those countries, the best thing to do would be really to hunker down, invest in healthcare, as well as put into place some targeted stimulus measures, such as paying for people's sick leave.
Katrina, you there for us in Beijing. Thank you, Katrina.
Top energy officials in the US and Russia will meet to tackle an historic collapse in global oil markets. The meeting comes after a dispute over output levels earlier this month sparked a price war between Russia and Saudi Arabia. Prices have plunged even further due to the coronavirus pandemic, and analysts say there is a little prospect of a recovery anytime soon. Al Jazeera's Osama bin Javed reports.
Oil traders call the current crisis a glut. There is so much cheap oil available, they're running out of places to store it. And that's on top of a catastrophic drop in demand due to the coronavirus pandemic. The global oil industry is at breaking point. The crisis began earlier in March at the headquarters of the oil cartel known as OPEC in Vienna. A 3-year-old pact to cut oil production fell apart when oil giants Russia and Saudi Arabia disagreed on further cuts. The Russians, who were allies but not members of OPEC, ended up refusing even to comply with previous reductions. Saudi Arabia flooded the market with crude. It also offered additional discounts to crush competition. Russia responded with a similar output increase. Oil prices dropped dramatically, some markets trading at less than $20 a barrel. Supertankers have become floating oil storage tanks for tens of millions of barrels of oil. COVID-19 has closed China's factories. Entire airlines have been grounded around the world. Lockdowns mean there are fewer cars on roads. Now emerging economies such as India are telling refiners the spread of the disease allows them to rip up existing oil purchase contracts. But the biggest impact is on the world's largest producer, United States. It's not part of OPEC, and US shale oil producers had been increasing output while OPEC countries were cutting theirs. Some US senators say Saudi Arabia and Russia are waging economic warfare against the US. The US oil lobby wants the Saudis to leave OPEC, partner with the US, and immediately reverse its high output policy.
Longer term, it's actually threatening the survival of the U.S. industry at this point. These prices are so low in the States. West Texas Intermediate crude is just a little over $22 right now. That's below the break-even price for most domestic oil and gas producers. And so they've actually laid down their rigs. They've stopped drilling. And even some producers have talked about shutting in, just trying to survive at this point.
Saudi Arabia has so far shrugged off US pressure, but OPEC is in the eye of an economic storm. Efforts to convene a meeting have failed. The Saudis aren't talking to the Russians to stabilize the market. That means prospects for recovery in prices are bleak at best. Oil traders fear the market is likely to worsen in coming weeks. Osama bin Javed, Al Jazeera.
All right, let's talk to our economics editor, Abid Ali, who is in London. And Abid, we just heard from Osama bin Javed's report, the negative effect on the US oil sector. But what about countries like Venezuela, like Nigeria, that are almost exclusively dependent upon oil revenue?
Yeah, absolutely. What you've got a situation right now is that Nigeria is actually struggling to find clients for its oil. And we're in the extraordinary situation where in some parts of the US oil market, we've seen oil prices at low as $7 a barrel. And we've had the situation where oil producers have been paying buyers to take away their oil. And all this because of the spat between Russia and Saudi Arabia. Now, both of these countries can stomach a long price war if they choose to. They have massive foreign currency reserves of more than $500 billion. And so they can stomach this for a little while, but not at these kind of low prices. And so both sides would like to see a resolution to this, but there's got to be a face-saving resolution to this as well, because the Saudis can't be seen to be backing down. After all, they were the ones who were out there saying to the Russians, let's cut oil production by 1.5 million barrels a day. But the Russians balked at that because they just wanted to see what was happening down the line. Now, for Saudi Arabia, when it comes to their budgets, they need oil prices about $80 a barrel, and Russia needs oil prices around $40 a barrel. After that, if prices fall below those particular prices, and we are currently at $22 a barrel, they will have to go to the bond markets and ask investors to help pay to run their economies. And this couldn't come at a worse time for these countries, as well as for Nigeria, as well as for Venezuela. When you look at demand around the world, it has just fallen off the side of a cliff. In the US last week, we had the Americans' job numbers, which came at 3.3 million people looking for unemployment benefit, and that's going to keep rising. We're expecting 14 million by the end of the second quarter. Almost with 2 billion people in lockdown, this demand has fallen by 20 million barrels a day. And we only have to look at the airline industry, which has grounded planes, where we see that 5 million barrels a day is just attributable to the airline industry, which has just been wiped out completely.
Right. Abid Ali, our economics editor, thank you very much talking to us live from London there.
Before we end the news, a recap of our main headlines. Thousands of informal sector workers jobless as Gambia closed non-essential businesses. Star FM TV donates sanitary materials to Numuya village. Commuters decry increment of public transport fares by drivers. New constitution to provide safe haven for all citizens, President Barrow. Social distancing, hand washing difficult amid poverty in Senegal. WHO calls on Asia-Pacific countries to stay vigilant in pandemic fight. Analysts expect oil prices to drop further. That's all for this edition of the news. Please enjoy the rest of our programs and join us tomorrow for more news. Thank you.